I spent yesterday reading your autobiography, which I really, really enjoyed.
Well, good. You must be a fast reader, but thank you.
Well, yeah, my parents were giving me some compliments, which is you know, rarer and rarer these days. But also, you know, I'm a massive fan of your work.
Thank you.
So, and
Thank you.
I bought the autobiography. I think it must have been about a year ago.
Yeah.
And you know, life happens, and you don't get down to reading as often
Sure.
as you should be. And I thought,
Yeah.
well, you know, if I'm getting this wonderful opportunity to have John on the podcast, I'm going to read the book. And that's final, and it was an absolute pleasure. It was one of the best Sundays that I've had in a while.
Thank you.
So I guess one of the first things I wanted to touch on, having read the book, was the amazing, because a lot of my listeners are going to have listened to Hall Oates and your solo work and the great musical things that you've done. But what an incredible thing to have Huntress Thompson as your neighbour and to play Huntress Thompson's what's now become an infamous memorial service.
Yes, it was without a doubt. I think his funeral was funeral celebration probably ranks up there with that of the pharaohs. I would dare say. And
because did Johnny Depp have his ashes shot into outer space?
It was a shot, yes, his ashes were shot from a 300-foot cannon that was erected in his back behind his house. And on top of the cannon was his fist, with the extra finger that he used with the peyote symbol in the center. And that it's an amazing story. I don't think you have a long enough time to tell the whole tale. But the crazy part about that funeral was that Hunter Thompson actually designed his own funeral back in the early 1970s with a guy named Ralph Steadman, who was an artist, a graphic artist, who did a lot of his cartoons in Rolling Stone and everything. And there's an actual documentary film of Hunter Thompson talking about how he wanted to design his funeral. And basically Johnny Depp just made it happen. It was really incredible. I think it cost about $2 million to do the funeral.
Yeah, I read that. And actually, before reading your autobiography, I saw in the news, because 10 years later, Johnny Depp was having some money problems, and one of the things that they mentioned was that he'd spent $2 million on Huntress Thompson's funeral, and I just thought, what a legend.
Well, that's a good, I'd call that being a good friend. You know, he was a huge, he admired Hunter. Obviously, he played him in a few films. And he was he loved him. In fact, I remember when they were doing some various films, Johnny was staying at Hunter's house. And I guess he was living, he was living the role, so to speak. And I remember pulling out our lane, because our lane would, if we went out our lane to the road, main road, if you continued across the road, you'd go directly into his driveway. And I remember I thought it was Hunter sitting on the lawn, with the cigarette holder and the slouch hat and the whole garb, that Hunter was so famous for. And I realized it wasn't him, it was Johnny Depp, but I guess he was playing the part,
Yeah.
Preparing, I guess, so to speak.
And I mean, it's just a snapshot into what's been an extraordinary life for you. And yeah, to my listeners, it's called Change of Seasons, John's autobiography. And yeah, you guys should buy it and read it, because I've read a lot of rock star autobiographies, but this was definitely one of the most entertaining. One particular thing, as I'm currently in the UK, and I've just somehow managed to get to Europe for a bit of summer. One part I really enjoyed actually was your road trip around Europe. This is, pre-Hall Oates,
Yes.
kind of not before you started taking music seriously, because you'd had some. I think had you had a hit by this point?
Well, I hadn't had a hit, but I had recorded a song in 1967.
Which did get played on the radio, right?
Yeah, it was my high school band, basically. And Daryl's group was doing the exact same thing at the exact same time. We were aware of each other, but we were friends, but we hadn't worked together. And really, it wasn't until I came back from Europe after basically busking and backpacking around Europe for about 3 or 4 months. I had sublet my apartment to Daryl's sister and her boyfriend while I was gone for the summer, and they'd never paid the rent. So when I got back, there was a padlock on the door. And I literally came back to the States with no money, literally the backpack and the guitar that I carried with me to Europe. And so I walked from my old apartment to Daryl's house where he was living. It wasn't far away in the city. And I knocked on his door and said, "Hey, here I am. I got nowhere to live. Your sister didn't pay the rent." And that's how I moved in with him. And that's when we started writing songs together.
Yeah. And what an incredible career that you had with have with Hall Oates, because I saw you guys. The only time I've seen you guys was last year when you played Birmingham.
Okay.
It was a great show. But I've been listening to your music yeah. I mean, it's impossible to escape as well due to those hits are evergreen, and but I guess it's difficult to know where to start with Hall Oates. But would you say that a big misconception of people's view of Hall Oates is that you guys are an 80s band, quote unquote? Because actually your career was really varied with Hall Oates, and it's just like the hits are incredibly catchy, incredibly well produced. A lot of them are very slick, but you guys did all sorts of things, whether it's the War Babies album or the Hall Oates when you started. Do you love every single one of your massive hits, or do you sometimes wish you could slip in a few more album tracks?
I always wish we could slip in a few more album tracks. I think we have a very interesting catalog of deeper tracks that go unnoticed due to the ubiquity of the hits. Really, they overshadow everything, it seems, in our career, which is, hey, I'm sure a lot of artists would love to have that problem. But yeah. It's one of those things where, I mean, we put a box set together. I believe it was 206 or 207. And in putting the box set together, Daryl and I, who neither of us listened to our music very often, probably not at all. And in doing the box set, we went back and actually dug deep into the album tracks. And I was astounded at the interesting stuff and the adventurous musical stuff that we had done. That really, here again, as you say, is overshadowed by the hits. So of course, I wish people would appreciate it, and I think the hardcore fans do. I think they do know that. Perhaps the casual fans, only come for the hits. But so be it. Like I said, it's a great problem to have.
Yeah, and I mean, there are some bands who had a lot of hits, and like their hits sound good at first, and then after a while, you kind of wear them out. But they, the hits, the Hall & Oates hits, just, I don't know. I don't personally get too tired of them. But yeah, I think you're right. Like people should dig deeper, and because there's such a breadth of genres that you guys are influenced by, and we'll touch on in a bit. On your kind of rebirth in Nashville, and which there wasn't even time for in the book, right. But I just want to ask about a few different things from Hall & Oates. Like one of the strongest singles was your, in my mind, like melodically, is one of the lesser known ones. "Do It for Love." Like I really like the chords, the melody. I think that stands up alongside like the big 70s and 80s hits. So
thank you.
What's the story of that?
Yeah, that song was written in the UK, actually. Daryl, over the years, Daryl had a house and has spent a lot of time in London. And we were recording with a production team in London at the time. So Daryl had gone over early and was doing a lot of the pre-production. And I didn't really go over right away. And when I finally did arrive in London, I kind of thought about it beforehand, but I didn't have a lot of ideas. I didn't have a lot that I felt like I was going to be able to bring to the table because I didn't really know what was going to happen, which in some ways can be good, in some ways not so good. And I remember I was walking from my hotel across this little bridge to where the studio was on the first day, and I was thinking about what am I doing here? What am I doing? I said, well, why am I doing this? do I do it for, am I doing it for money, doing it for, what I do it because this is what I do. I do it for love. And I came to the studio that day with that concept, with that title, with that approach, basically. And that's how the song began. And Daryl, immediately gravitated to the idea and said, yeah, we do it for love. Let's write that. And that's how that song came about.
Yeah, it's such a wicked record. Like it just puts a smile on your face, that tune.
Yeah, well, it's real. It's real. It's pure, and it's honest.
And so one of the strongest things I think about Hall & Oates music is the melodies. And you mentioned in your book, in the 90s, when you were recording less and working on Hall & Oates less, and kind of, it was more of time of personal growth for you. That kind of went out of fashion. Do you think melody's back in fashion now?
No, not really.
Do you think bands have got a lot less melodically strong since the kind of?
I think, yes. I mean, I think there's melody by committee, so to speak. A lot of because I've been dabbling in the world of modern pop lately, working with some younger songwriters, and it's there seems to be this this way of working now where you have a top line person. They call them a top line, and it's the person who comes up with the melody over the groove or over the production. And the production, due to Pro Tools and due to the amazing potential that you have in the recording studio and in with the world of a computer, the production has really become the star of a lot of these records. It's really the production and the gimmicks and I shouldn't say gimmick because that demeans it, but the clever use of sampling and certain digital effects that has become really more of the star on the record than the actual melody. I think melody has taken a back seat to it. When we didn't have so much to work with back in the old days, we had organic classic instruments, guitars, bass, keyboards, drums, whatever, maybe a synthesizer thrown in. It really was more of a traditional approach of chords and melody. And above and beyond the melody and the chords, I think it's the unique way that Daryl and I, there's only a certain amount of notes in a melody. But it's the unique way that we combine and impose a series of notes over a series of chords changes. So it's the harmonic sensibility that we use that's unique to us. It comes from a lot of things. It comes from our past, from Philadelphia, from doo-wop, street corner singing, from R&B, a lot of things. But it's really something that's very unique to us. The way, everyone can play a C chord and everyone can play an A minor chord. But what are the notes you're going to sing over that C chord, and what are the notes you'll sing over the A minor chord? That's what the difference is. And somehow we have this unique way of doing that.
It's almost like, feel is a different thing, but you've got that feel for the songwriting where, obviously, like if you looked at a chord chart of a Hall & Oates song, like in a lot of cases, an accomplished musician would obviously be able to play those chords. But to call these things the top line person and like the modern songwriting does sound a little bit like a nightmare compared to the kind of more romantic aspect of two friends like writing together and writing about their lives.
I think we really carry on that classic songwriting tradition, especially the songwriting team. The songwriting team is a classic combination. You can take it back to Lerner and Lowe and the Gershwin brothers and McCartney, Lennon and McCartney and on and on and on. Exactly. There's so many songwriting teams. So we, it's almost like we're kind of almost the last of that era. It's a classic form. And even though Daryl and I don't write together all the time, we still approach it in the same kind of way. And even if I'm writing with people now, today, I still kind of approach it the same way. The approach has never really changed much for me.
And so another tune that I kind of want to zoom in on, because I wonder whether have you ever seen the show Hello Ladies?
Yeah, Alone Too Long.
Yeah, because that was like you know, after I'd heard 20 of the big hits probably, and I was like loving them. And then this song, it's just got the groove. Like it just immediately puts a smile. And there were a lot of people who didn't even know like your big hits that I was watching it, and they were like, "What is that tune? It's so good." And was that just tucked away on an album? Was that a hit?
You know, it was released as a single. It didn't do that well. It probably went into the top 30, maybe top 20. And it was one of those things where it's a very Philadelphia kind of groove. The chord changes are very Philadelphia R&B in style. And I always thought it was a pretty cool song. And I was really glad that that Steve Merchant picked up on that to put it in the HBO series. Because it seemed to work really well in that series. And I'm glad he went in deep into the catalog as opposed to just picking one of the more obvious big hits.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. It was a great choice. One of the things that I think informs the breadth of Hall Oates and your own solo work is, and it's quite hard for you to distill, but you seem to be good at remembering all the names of your influences, is people don't get, you know, you spent a lot of time in LA working with, you know, big session musicians like Lee Sklar. And I mean, I think you guys ended up producing yourselves rather than working with David Foster, but you kind of had a lot of time in LA. Then you sang on stage with the Temptations, having seen them, and obviously Daryl's in the Temptones. So there's huge Philadelphia influence. And obviously you're probably most closely associated with Philadelphia, but then New York as well. And then now you've had this rebirth in Nashville. Of all of these different influences, do they kind of all equally inform you, or would you highlight, let's say, like Philadelphia soul as the big influence?
Well, I think every songwriter and every artist is probably, at their core, it's the music of their youth that informs most of the things that they do going further into their life. I think you can it might be a generalization, but I think it's true. For me, it's the early music that I heard, the early days of rock and roll, even the stuff that happened before rock and roll that my parents played for me as a little kid that seeped into my musical DNA, the big band music of the World War II generation. And then the folk music of the folk revival in the early 60s, and the blues and all the roots musicians who were being rediscovered during that period of time. So, and then you have the geographic influence of, yes, growing up in the Philadelphia area, listening to the radio that was being played that was unique to Philadelphia, because in those days when I was growing up, American music was very regional. You had a certain kind of music that was being played in Philadelphia, a certain kind of music being played in Detroit, certain kind of music being played in Memphis, the Stax Volt sound, and so on and so forth. Obviously, the California sound with the Beach Boys and things like that. It was very regional. It wasn't homogenized into this kind of blanding of, across the country where all the kids listen to the same music all the time. It was, if you went to a different city, you would, on the radio, you'd hear different songs that you'd never heard back in where you lived at home. So that is, as a jumping off point, I carry that forward. And then, living in New York, the sound of the city, that affected the way we recorded the War Babies album as a direct result of living in New York City. It was our way of like kind of regurgitating the experience of being in this very high powered, hectic place compared to, say, Philadelphia. Going out to LA, playing with those musicians added a different sensibility. So it has to do with your earliest influences, but it also has to do with what's happening at the moment, your geography, the people you're around, and so on and so forth. So moving to Nashville and starting my adventure in Nashville in the late 1990s, I realized there was a way I could tap back into my earliest influences, my folk and roots influences. And there was a community of musicians who could relate to that and help me do that. So that was the journey that Nashville brought, that took me on. And the music that I've made since coming to Nashville is a direct result of being here in this city.
And so, like, what was the first album that you made in Nashville?
The first album I made in Nashville was an album called 1,000 Miles of Life in 2007. And it was, I basically put together a dream wish list of great Nashville musicians. And luckily for me, fortunately for me, they answered my phone calls, and they all showed up at various times. And I got to play with some of the greats in bluegrass and roots music, people like Sam Bush, Jerry Douglas, Bela Fleck, people like that. I got to play with, sing with Becca Bramlett and Bonnie Bramlett, legendary, singers. And so on and so forth. So there was that was an eye-opening experience, and it just really whet my appetite for what could happen in Nashville. And I kind of drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, by doing that very, very first session. And then from then on, I began to make friends and began to kind of create a little musical community, which ended up being the Good Road Band, which is the band that I currently recorded with the Arkansas album and the live album.
And before that, you'd made one solo album before you moved to Nashville, right?
Yeah, I made an album called Feng Shui, which was really just a collection of oddball stuff that I had laying around. It was almost like I need to make a record and get it out of my system, but it had no coherency. It wasn't coherent. It was there was some cool moments and some cool things, but it didn't have a point of view. And I knew, and that's when I went to Nashville. And from that point on, my albums have all had much more of a cohesive point of view.
And was it like it must have been one of the, well, you couldn't say maybe one of the proudest moments of your career, but maybe it was, because you've obviously had a lot of big moments, but playing the Grand Ole Opry, I mean, it sounded like it was a huge thing, because I guess it's like the second time around getting proper, really strong vindication as an artist.
Yeah, the fact that I was invited to play the Grand Ole Opry, not many artists of my generation and my genre get a chance to do that, because it's a little bit of a closed, a little bit of a closed club. It requires that there's a certain credibility that I think you need. And I was invited by Vince Gill and Marty Stewart, people who I have a lot of respect for in their worlds, and for them to invite me on board and to walk on that stage and stand in that spot where Elvis and the greats of country music stood over the years, legends, Johnny Cash and so on and so forth. To stand on that spot and experience that magic, that vibe of being in that room, is something that's very hard to describe. And it's humbling and exciting, and it is a vindication of sorts that that you've arrived and that you're accepted into that world.
Yeah, because it's a really amazing world, and people like to have that kind of validation in almost a new genre,
Right.
By someone like Vince Gill, is just such a legend, one of the best guitarists out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of your work with Hall Oates, like what would you say is the best song that you wrote with Hall Oates? Because judging by the book and my own answer, and it's probably in my opinion, the best Hall Oates song would be "She's Gone," but I wonder whether that would still be the case.
Well, I would have to agree with you. Yes. There's something about that song. There's just, Daryl and I were able to tap into something that is very rare when you're a songwriter. It's something you pray for and hope for. It doesn't always happen. We were able to somehow pull together this sense of universal loss, but not make it too maudlin and not make it too depressing, but just capture these very mundane and everyday images that somehow, when put into the combination and combined with the melody and of course the record production by Arif Mardin and all, and all the great playing on it, it just crystallizes this certain thing. There's a line, I mean, even the opening line is unique and provocative. Everybody's high on consolation.
Very good line.
It's a unique and powerful line, and it sets the tone for the rest of the song. And then a line like worn as a toothbrush hanging in the stand. Now we all, if you think back, you've all gone into into the loo, and you find you find that toothbrush. It's all flared out and kind of, should have chucked it out a few weeks ago, but you didn't. And
Yeah.
it's a kind of a lonely image, kind of a sad and lonely image, but it's not depressing or like I said, maudlin. And I think it was just that song walks that line, and somehow everyone can pick a moment in that song that they can relate to in a very profound way.
Oh, unbelievably. It's one of those songs that you can instantly relate to. I think I heard it when I was like hungover for the first time I heard it. I was like hungover. I was probably about like 19, wandering around London, and I was like,
Had you gotten stood up or something? Because it works very well for that.
No, I think I just had like a raging hangover and acted like a bit of an idiot the night before, and it just really summed up the mood. But it was like very soothing, and I mean, it kind of sums up a bit. It's got a bit of everything in there: a bit of soul, a bit of rock, a bit of pop, just everything in there. I was wondering whether you'd ever noticed the similarities in the chords and just a bit of the general vibe between She's Gone and I'm Not in Love by 10cc.
Of course, it's the exact same chords.
Yeah.
I give those guys credit for having good musical taste.
Yeah. I mean, at least, in that case, it's a bit like the backgrounds that they did and stuff was pretty cool. But I'm ashamed to say that I heard that song first before She's Gone, because they're a British band.
If it inspired that song, because their song is really good. It's a great song, and you can't copyright chord changes. The chord changes. If that was the case, Chuck Berry would be a multi-gazillionaire.
Yeah, for sure. But at the same time, it was, I guess it wasn't like their chord changes were over a really fast beat with like different instrumentation. The starts of the songs are like, because when I first heard She's Gone, I was like, hang on a minute, is this 10cc?
Wait, who's
and then I Googled it, and it was like, you guys were first. And I mean, they are different songs, so I guess it's not a too big a bone of contention there. But and I mean, another example, this must be one of the most sampled songs in history. I Can't Go For That.
Yes.
And again, like this one, like was a bit less obvious till I read about it, but I Can't Go For That, obviously one of your biggest singles, and then huge similarities there with the bass line to Billie Jean, like Michael Jackson's biggest single.
Well, Michael Jackson told us flat out. He said, "I love the day." He said, "I love to dance to I Can't Go For That in my bedroom." He goes, and he even said he got the feel from I Can't Go For. He wanted to write a song like I Can't Go For That, and so he basically used the same vibe. I mean, so it was very, very clear. He was making no bones about it that that it was totally inspired by I Can't Go For That.
Did that at all like annoy you, or were you just kind of like whatever? Like our single was so big that I don't really mind.
No, no, it didn't annoy me at all. In fact, I always take it as a compliment. Even the sampled versions, the Simply Red version.
That's great.
Yeah, I mean, he basically just used our song and wrote another song over top of it. Wrote another melody and a set of words over top of it. I mean, that's really blatant. But, and then there's, of course, more subtle versions. The original sampled version of De La Soul, the group De La Soul, they called it Say No Go. And that was actually the first time I ever heard an artist using a sample to create a new song. For me, as long as the songwriters get credit and get compensated for their original composition, I see no problem in it, because it's really, in a sense, it's a tribute. And they're creating something new from what went before them. And in a sense, I have always done the same thing with early folk and early R&B that is part of my original, my earliest influences. I've regurgitated and recalibrated some some stuff into my material. So, but of course, sampling didn't exist, so I couldn't actually take it. I had to actually try to reproduce it. But that goes on all the time. I mean, that's been always going on.
Was the Simply Red thing? Was that like a request?
Yeah, they're all requests at this point now. the world is savvy to sampling, and when there's a very blatant, obvious sample, they have to have they make a request, and as long as the publishing and everything is handled properly, and then that's fine.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you guys, I guess, are probably one of the most sampled bands. Those are just a few examples. There's lots of stuff that's been used by people like Kanye West and so on. But so from who would you consider to be Hall & Oates's like contemporaries? Like, were there other bands around the same time that you guys were making music that you really dug, or were you just really focused in on what you were doing around that time?
It's interesting. I was always so focused on what I did on my own and what I was doing with Daryl that I very seldom paid a lot of attention to music was going. My wife is a bit younger than me, and she really loves the 80s music. And so she'll always be talking about a band, or so. I didn't even know they existed. I mean, honestly, I was so in my own world. We had our little solar system of people and bandmates and business people, and we just operated it was a very insulated world. So there's music that happened in the 80s that I'm not even aware of. Of course I hear it later on, and she'll say, "Don't you like so and so?" I'm like, well, I'm not sure. And it's kind of weird to be part of the music business and to be such a big part of the music business, but yet not be that aware of what's going on around you.
I guess there's only so many hours in the day, so it's not like
you're focused on your own work,
Not like when you were flying your plane after a gig, having just played like 2 hours of Hall & Oates. It's not like you were going to be like, "Hey Daryl, do you want to listen to Huey Lewis and the News now?" Like,
exactly.
So one of the things that's extremely interesting in the book, and just in general, because debt can be a real ball and chain, and there'll be people listening to this podcast who are in debt right now and struggling with it. And you guys had some, pretty frustrating experiences by the sounds of things in the 80s, where, I don't want to, I don't know what the best way to explain it is, but I'd love to hear it from you rather than me rambling on. You guys had some problems where you hadn't been paid what you were owed, and you ended up with a big load of like record label debt, right?
Yes. One thing, yes, this is true, but our story is not, it's actually more the norm than the unusual. I mean, go back to the earliest days of rock and roll, and it sounds like a cliche and a joke, but the bluesmen who came to Chicago and signed with these record companies in Chicago, they literally were paid a bottle of wine, and they would record all day, and those recordings went out on records and they never saw another dime. That's the extreme example, but going up through history, I mean, Billy Joel, he went through the same thing with management and, being mismanaged and having issues with things like that. And it goes on and on. I mean, that it's probably more normal for bands of that era of the 60s, 70s, and 80s to have been basically taken advantage of on the business side than not. So in our case, our relationship with our manager was almost like a dysfunctional family. It was like we were the children, and he was the father. And you guys go be pop stars and go run around the world and go play and party and do whatever it is you're doing. I'll take care of the rest. And of course, that's a very seductive thing to be told when you have a blank check and you can basically indulge yourself in all sorts of, things that whether they be weaknesses or desires, or many times the weaknesses and desires. But anyway, let's not go too far there. But the point is that, so we were just oblivious to what was going on the business side. And sure, we should have been paying more attention to it. But we had this situation where, don't worry about it. It's taken care of. You guys go have fun. Go be rock stars, making more #1 records. That's what you do. This is what I do. This is what you do. And we carried on like that until it no longer worked anymore. And that paradigm, collapsed. And when it did, I was left with, it's kind of a misconception too. A lot of people said, oh, you went broke, at the end of the 80s. Well, it's not really true. I lost a lot of cash, but I had a lot of shit. I had multiple apartments in New York, a house in Connecticut, an airplane, a car collection, blah, 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 blah. A condo in Aspen, Colorado. I had all this stuff. So yes, I was what they call cash poor. And it's a kind of financial term, which is kind of ironic. But anyway, but I had a lot of stuff. And so it was a wake-up call. And what I did was I sold everything. I literally cleaned house. I sold everything I had, established a very tidy sum of money, and I restructured my life where I didn't need it anymore. And I didn't need the cars and the houses and the airplanes and all that accoutrement. And my life changed. And that's when I moved to Colorado. That's when I got remarried, had a kid, built a house. And really, it set the tone for the rest of my life. So at the time when I was facing what seemed to be these dire situation, it turned out to be probably the best thing that ever happened to me, because it caused me to grow up. It caused me to take responsibility for myself and to move forward in my life in a way that perhaps I might not have done.
I mean, you've got to sympathize in terms of, you were told, just go and make the music.
Yeah.
Go and be the rock star. I mean, who wouldn't want to do that? Who, especially as well, because obviously there's lots of fun that you guys would have had, but at the same time, it's long hours of rehearsing. It's pretty taxing to write songs and play gigs, and to also be businessmen at the same time. Why would you want that when you had a manager? But what would your advice to younger people be who are trying to start out there and become musicians, or who already are musicians? Do you think it's impossible to just kind of separate yourself from the business side? Do you think it's much better to?
It's much better today than it was. There's a wealth of information and resources now available to younger musicians, and younger musicians are smarter. The ones who take it seriously and the ones who actually have the potential to have a career are taking it very seriously. I work with a lot of young musicians in Nashville. I write songs, produce with them, and I find them to be light years ahead of where I was at the same age in terms of their knowledge of the music business and covering themselves. The sad part of that is the music. There's not much of a music business to be savvy about, which is sad. But they're much more serious and much more knowledgeable about what's going on. Anyone who is going to try to have a career in this very difficult life and world, you really need to understand the complexities of publishing, and especially publishing, and management, and relationships and contracts, and the kids who are coming out of the music schools like Belmont University and Berkeley and things like that. I did a visiting professorship at Berkeley, and I was always very impressed with the fact that they took business courses as part of the curriculum and stuff. So yeah, it's a whole different world now.
And in terms of other amazing things that have happened to you in your life, you have a big passion for racing.
Yeah.
And through this passion, you established a friendship with George Harrison, which is amazing. But kind of, I remember at the start of the book, you were kind of saying that the Beatles weren't, you kind of understood the Beatles a bit later, but initially you were like, not so sure. Do you still feel that way?
It was so funny. You have to take it into the context of the time and where I was. Philadelphia, if you think about Philadelphia, Philadelphia was famous in the 60s for teenage dance shows. Dick Clark's American Bandstand. It's where teenagers would come to dance. So if a song didn't have a groove that you could dance to, it definitely was not a hit in Philadelphia. So when the Beatles first came out with their early music, like I Want to Hold Your Hand and Please Please Me and things like that, they were not very danceable songs. They were kind of like almost like old rockabilly songs. And to people in Philadelphia, it sounded kind of as if they were trying to, they almost sounded like like a garage band. Like they were just banging out these songs, and you know, and they didn't have that R&B swing that teenagers were dancing to. So there was kind of this weird backlash in Philadelphia where they literally would not play early Beatles records on the radio. So I was caught up in that. You know, I was listening to the Temptations and Curtis Mayfield and Sam and Dave, and you know, so for me, the Beatles. You know, it wasn't really until their records began to be more adventurous and they've gotten more involved in the production methods, like on Norwegian Wood and those songs, and eventually on from there, where they really began to use the studio as a musical instrument with George Martin. Then I really began to focus on what they were doing and realize, wow, these guys are taking music to a whole other place. But in the beginning, I didn't think that. So when I met George, you know, we bonded over race cars. We met through Sir Jackie Stewart, who has become a lifelong friend. He and his family have become lifelong friends. And, you know, when I went to George's house to Friar Park, we didn't even talk about music. We talked about cars and stuff, which I think was probably refreshing for him, that, you know, our friendship wasn't going to be based on, hey, let's write a song together, you know, which I'm sure, you know, he was inundated with. What was really cool was when he was living in Los Angeles and we were recording in 1978 or 77, we were recording an album called Along the Red Ledge. And I had kept in touch with him, and he invited Daryl and I over to his house to watch the Ruddles movie. I don't know if you've ever seen the Ruddles movie.
I haven't. I want to, after reading the
Monty Python send-up of the Beatles.
Yeah.
And George produced it, and he was very proud of it, you know. And it was so funny to go to his house and watch this send-up of the Beatles, and with him describing all the stuff. Yeah, this is what they're doing. You know, it was so, you know, it was very surreal. So while we were there, and we said, hey, George, we're making an album. Would you like to play on it? And he was like, oh, yeah. He said, but I just want to be in the band. I don't want any special treatment. I just want to come down and play with the band. I said, great. And so that's what he did. He came down and I played acoustic guitar, and he was so happy to be in the band and not be like, you know, put on the spot to, okay, George, come on, you got to do your classic slide guitar solo, you know. No, he loved it. He hung around all day with the band, shot the shit, and, you know, and played, and it was great, you know. He was a really amazing person, and miss him. Yeah.
That's awesome. And I mean, I listened to the Beatles before listening to things like the Temptations and Sam and Dave, but, you know, I do have to sympathize with you kind of like only getting into their stuff later, because I think the Temptations' early stuff is better than the Beatles' early stuff, and the Beatles are like deity to me. But
well, the music
they came into their own later.
Yeah, the music, the you know, early R&B, the R&B of the '60s was very sophisticated. You know, string arrangements and horns, and, you know, and that was the kind of stuff I was into. It's like this, you know, because when I've been playing, you know, by the time the '60s hit, you know, I was playing music for well over 10 years. So I was a fairly accomplished guitar player. I wasn't great, but, you know, I had an appreciation of, you know, people who did arrangements and read music and things like that. So that's kind of where I was coming from.
Yeah, well, I mean, that music, you know, that you would have grown up alongside in Philadelphia is incredible stuff. And I mean, but then so later on, or kind of it was roughly around the same time of your friendship starting with George Harrison, but you and Daryl had a meeting with George Martin. Like, is that like after what album was that after? And George Martin wanted to produce you guys, and you said no.
Well, not really. Yes and no.
What a life.
We did. We met with George. He was in New York, and we got a message that I think he was looking for something to do. You know, he wasn't producing the Beatles anymore. And we met. We had a lunch with him at a very fancy hotel on Park Avenue, it was Central Park West, and really nice lunch. We talked about music, and we talked about, you know, things. And then nothing seemed to happen. It wasn't that we didn't want to work with him. We were in the midst of our own thing. And I think we were so single-mindedly focused. And at that time, we were producing ourselves. So it wasn't at that point, we didn't feel like even a producer with a great credibility and the great, you know, reputation of a George Martin, it would have felt like stepping back to go under someone else's, kind of production ideas. Who knows what would have happened? It might have been a great experience, and I'm sure it would have been. But nevertheless, we were very, strong-willed at that time about what we were doing.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, that definitely comes across. So what would you say is the proudest moment of your career? Was it the night that the Temptations joined you at the Apollo? Was it the night at the Grand Ole Opry? Was it maybe the Temptations reprising their performance with you at Live Aid?
You're hitting all the right buttons, buddy.
Or is it something else?
Well, without being too hippy dippy on this, my favorite moment of my career is absolutely right now. Not necessarily that we're talking.
Well, an honor, John. I didn't know you liked the podcast so much.
You should take that as a compliment. But
I do.
You do, and you should. No, but what I mean by that is the fact that I'm here, the fact that I'm healthy enough to perform, to write, that I'm still interested in it, that people are still interested in hearing the things that I'm doing and the things that I'm doing with Daryl, that we're selling out shows bigger than we did during our heyday in the 80s. To me, that's a mind-blowing thing. That is the great accomplishment to me. All the other stuff are really great, moments and important moments. And without a doubt, the Apollo Theater with Eddie and David, Live Aid, We Are the World, playing at the Ryman, all that stuff is super, super, the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, whatever, all super, super important and very important milestones. But the reality of it is that if someone would have told me in the early 70s that in 2020, when I was 70 years old, that people would actually care about anything that I was doing, because when I was 20, if someone was 70, they didn't exist. They were a non-entity, really. Even there were no 70-year-old rock stars, because rock and roll wasn't 70 years old yet. Yeah. So it's kind of a weird thing to understand. But now, rock and roll is evergreen. It's forever. And, at least for the time being, it's forever. But I'm just really happy to be a part of a great legacy of music that I've made with Daryl and continuing to make.
And are you missing playing live a lot during this, Corona season?
Yeah, I am. I am missing playing live. It's something that you can't ever replace or replicate. It's an energy, and I think playing live is what keeps you young and keeps you vital. I think that's one of the reasons Daryl and I have been able to sustain, is because we never really stopped playing live. We've always played live. There were periods of time when we didn't do it as frequently, but by playing live, is an edge that you have. And it's going to be hard to get back to that. I'm a little bit nervous and afraid that when we finally do open up again, it's going to be hard to get back into that mentality and that physicality of doing that. I'm sure it'll happen, but there's nothing that replaces live playing.
Are you talking from, personally, you'll find it difficult to get back out there and like the band and Daryl, or are you saying, will the audience? I mean, probably in your case, the audience will be there, but like in a lot of people's cases, they might be afraid.
Yeah, well, unless it's safe, they are going to be afraid, and I fully understand it. And, from my point of view, the way I look at it from the other side of the stage, I don't want to sleep in a hotel room. I really don't. If someone told me right now, it's totally safe, there'll be people in the audience and everything's fine, just go. I would honestly have second thoughts about sleeping in hotel rooms and eating in restaurants every night. It's a different world now. So a lot has to change before we can, I think, get back to something, some semblance of normalcy.
Well, just because of the virus and the risks and stuff, you wouldn't want to just be going out there with like hotels and restaurants.
Yeah, what if the rooms aren't clean? You don't know. I mean, the things that we took for granted are just absolutely now, in retrospect, unbelievably kind of cavalier in a way. We just bounced around the world. Stick your head in a pillow in a strange bed. who knows who's had their face in that pillow? You know, I don't want to get too morbid about this, but the things that, you know, and then eating in a restaurant 3 times a day, every day in a different city, you know, that's what you do when you're on tour. Boy, that's a whole different set of challenges.
Yeah, it is for sure. One of the things that kind of amused me in the book was the
I'm
fact.
glad you're getting back to something more amusing. Thank you.
Well, yeah, because coronavirus, you know, I feel like I talk about coronavirus too much, and
Yeah,
sometimes because you know it's on everybody's mind, and sometimes the people that I'm interviewing, you know, occasionally like just stop talking about
yeah,
coronavirus.
I agree.
So,
Let's move on.
so one of the things that that did amuse me and kind of I don't know, it made me a bit hungry was the fact that you said that you'd eaten not a single meal in for 10 years. You'd eaten all your meals in restaurants. Sounded
Yes.
very good.
You know, when I lived in New York City from 1972 until 1987, I never ate in my apartment, ever. The only thing I ever did in my apartment was make coffee. I swear, or maybe have some takeout food in the refrigerator. I don't think I even turned the stove on. Probably wouldn't have even known how to do it. Um, well, of course, you know, when you live in a city like New York with the greatest restaurants in the world, it was,
Yeah.
you know, but honestly, and that is not an exaggeration. I never, ever cooked in my apartment, ever.
And do you kind of like these days having more of a balance and
Oh yeah, I mean, my wife and I have been together for 25 years, and you know, we during this period of time, we cook at home all the time, and she's great, and she really, you know, we've really been able to settle into a home life. So if there's any positives from this whole thing, it's really been a chance to really do that for sure.
and so from because the last solo album that you brought out was a couple of years ago, wasn't it? It was Arkansas.
Yeah.
Do you have plans for another solo album?
Not really. This live album that we're releasing September 18th is really an extension of Arkansas. It's the same group, the Good Road Band, the exact same lineup that played on the Arkansas album, playing live. And most of the material is from the Arkansas album with some other songs thrown in. So in a sense, it's kind of an extension of the Arkansas project. And no, not right now. I don't think so. I am doing a movie. I'm working on a really cool film called Gringa, which will be coming out later this year or early next year. It's a really nice little movie. It's about a young girl in Southern California who tries to find her father in Mexico, who's left the family a long time ago. And a good friend of mine is the director. He reached out to me, and I've got 5 songs in the movie, and they're all interesting collaborations. One is with a hip hop artist named Servon Campbell from South Carolina. One is with a great Mexican singer named Jimena Sariana, and we do a duet together. Another is with another great female singer from LA, Daphne Willis. And so it's really a unique combination of collaborating with younger artists and doing writing with a script, which is kind of really fun because it gave the writing a point of view immediately. There was no floundering around with trying to find ideas. All you had to do is read the script and go, oh, there it is right there. That's evocative. That's a great image, or that's a moment to kind of expand on. So it's been fun. And I think some of the best writing I've done in a long time is for this Gringa movie that's coming out.
All right, I'm really looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
So do you think that you'll ever make another album with Daryl?
Well, right before we shut it all down, we were just starting the preliminary pre-production. Daryl had some song ideas. He was working with a producer from Holland, and I had some song ideas, and we were batting ideas back and forth. And then the whole thing collapsed, you know, and that's when we all kind of stopped. So we will get back to it at some point, but not right now.
That would be cool. What was the last album?
The last album we made was probably Our Kind of Soul, I guess, or the Christmas album, maybe.
And then and the last album of like full on like originals album was like 2003. It was Do It for Love.
Yeah, Do It for Love. Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
God, so that would be. And do you care at all that you know, I mean, I would have still been like pretty much a kid, like when you guys when you guys had, let's say, after the huge 80s and 70s success, when you had a bit of a dip in the 90s and you were taking it less seriously because you were taking your personal life more seriously. Did you care at all when Hall & Oates became very cool again? Or were you just like, were you just kind of like, you know, not as phased by it? Because Hall & Oates became very cool kind of like over the last years.
It was very satisfying to know that people actually cared about the old music and cared about us. That was really a great feeling. Because here, I think every artist wants to be, you know, every artist has a need to be, you know, loved by the fans and by, and to know that the music that they're making is reaching people. So when that began to happen, yeah, it was really cool, because it's one thing to go out and flog it out, you know, when you're just, you know, you're not getting the response and it's not coming back to you. And all of a sudden, when the world has kind of turned in your favor and is validating you and your life and your work, there's no doubt that it's a really good feeling. And I think it energized both Daryl and I to do better shows and to really focus on our band. And the Hall & Oates band is incredible. And it's, you know, one of these days we'll get the band back together.
Yeah, well, you know, I at one of the gigs, I'll definitely be there, because it was a very, very good show in Birmingham, and you guys sounded awesome. So yeah, John, thank you so much for taking the time to do this. And you know, I will just say that you guys, I interview a lot of people for this series, but Hall & Oates and like your guys' achievements, like melodically, the chords, everything, it's just some of my favorite music, and I'll never get tired of it. And you've definitely had that effect on a lot of people. Wow, so regardless of whether it's like, you know, the cool thing or not the cool thing, you know, I'll always be a listener. I'm sure there are many other people. So thanks, man. And I hope, take care. Take care, and I hope you get back out there, you know, both with your solo band and with Daryl as soon as possible. But thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks. It was a great interview. I appreciate you doing the doing your homework. Good job.
Oh, no worries. It was a pleasure. Thanks, John. Bye.